In the last months, I started receiving multiple messages on socials about making a new guide for Digifreeze. I was hesitant to make a new guide as many things didn't change a lot in my opinion, but I still decided to make this video after a lot of demand to explain what has changed in version 1.2. Enjoy the guide and hopefully it will answer your questions. Let's start with the powertrain page. You have your fuel ratio and virtual energy. At all times you should use 100% of virtual energy and manually change your fuel ratio to avoid any type of DSQ because you run out of virtual energy. The engine mix should always be on race mode. Water and oil covers are going to be fully closed in qualifying and generally in open or 20% closed to make sure that you have some engine temps in race. For the traction control, just like last guide, you can see the precise effects of each settings that you can have on screen, so DC on board, DC power cut and DC slip angle. Just a bit later I will give you a table regrouping a lot of information that we need related to this. Last point is preload. A low value will increase rotation while a high value will increase stability and make the car less surprising while changing direction. Understeer cars like Mercedes or Aston will use low values, while oversteer cars like Porsche will use higher values, let's say around 100 to 250 Nm to keep the car under control more easily. Just like in the previous guide, I made a table with traction control, brake bias, ABS and this time preload settings that I would recommend for everyone who wants to try and make setups on all cars. This is a really good base. Normally almost all the time you will not make like huge changes from this, but it can happen depending on which type of setup you run, if it's more understeer or oversteer. Remember that in fixed setups you will use more aggressive traction control settings, but I think this table should be very useful for anyone who has no idea where to start from. Now let's go on to the second page of setups. Tire pressures are still at the minimum because it gives you the best amount of grip and the least amount of tire wear. For camber, you will see people running sometimes a bit negative value, so not fully onto the right with the most positive. This reason is because it gives you a really good feeling in terms of cornering, but there is huge downsides to using camber. It reduces your top speed and it will also increase your tire temperatures and mainly the difference between the outside and the inside of the tire, as you can see on the telemetry just now. I would still recommend using the maximum positive value because it's much more easier to have a good car with it that has no tire wear. I would then recommend to keep maximum positive camber values so you have the least amount of tire wear, and then you can play with other parts of the setup to make your car much more quicker. Brake bias is quite easy to understand. On the left you have the amount of braking that you will have on the front, and on the right it's the amount that you will have on the rears. If you have a front engine car, you want to put all the brake force towards the rear, this way you will get rotation. And if you have a mid-engine to rear engine car, you need to do the opposite, so this way the car stays stable because your car is already too much oversteery, so you need to compensate it by making the brake bias a bit less aggressive. Brake ducts are 99% of the time opened. It's to avoid any type of overheat in race scenario. Small reminder that you want to avoid exceeding 750 degrees for too long during a braking zone, otherwise you might activate ABS or have the feeling you did, leading to small understeers that can be really annoying to manage. You could technically close the brake ducts in qualifying, but from the tests I did, it's not absolutely necessary and it will be situational. Last part is the pedal force. I still recommend in GT cars to put it at 100%, even if it means activating more easily ABS. The reason is that having max brake force will always help you to push and have control over your car. I originally thought that reducing the brake force would reduce a lot the brake temps to be worth it, let's say to use like 95% instead of 100, but it does not seem to be the case. I tried and it's like moving probably like 30 degrees, which is not enough, but I wanted to mention it as it could happen one day on another patch that you would lower this value to manage your brakes. Third page of this guide, suspension. The explanations from last video still work for the majority of the time, but I'm going to do a quick recap of the type of suspension that you will see and what they can do to a car. High front suspension, low rear gives you the best traction, great braking, also less bumps, as increasing the spring race also makes your car higher. This is what you would generally see in cars like the Porsche or the Lamborghini that are quite quick but are also super oversteery, so that's the best way to manage it by creating some kind of stability with a stiffer front end. low front suspension, high rear. This way you will have way more oversteer, a really pointy front end. This is typically used in the Merc GT3 as the car is very high on the front. That needs to be lowered as much as possible to create what we call a positive brake, which basically means having a lower front than rear to simplify it. Last option is equal suspension on both front and rears, generally happening on cars like Lexus or Mustang, at least from what I can recall. It's used in cars that are relying a lot on the setup choices, and these setup choices are basically choosing a side between oversteer or understeer. It works also really well on cars that bottoms out a lot, to the point they need to use packers to prevent any loss of time. Previously I told you that the Porsche was using a very stiff front spring rate, and that sometime it could have gone up to 10 or 15, really high values, but now the car needs to be more softer in terms of front suspension with the new tire model, making the majority of GT3s also using the minimum front suspension. That does not mean it's the only value that you should use, but it shouldn't be a surprise if you end up on quite a low value that you did not expect. Let's say that you are using 3 front spring rate and 3 rear spring rate on the Mustang also. Maybe now you should use 2.2 or 1.1 since the update. This is just a warning in case it works, because I'm not 100% sure of what is the clear meta of all cars. Just like for the camber, it's not 100% sure what is the strongest value yet, and it could be really car dependent, but generally having a low front suspension works kinda well. Next part of the suspension are the ride height and the packers. Front ride height is still at 5.0 cm in 95% of the setups and the cars, except sometimes in the Lamborghini, the Ferrari, and sometimes the Mustang you will use 5.1, 5.2, maybe 5.3 to avoid bottoming. And it might be also a requirement for car stability in all conditions, but you should always try to target 5.0 cm, which is the minimal value on the front. In the case the car bottoms out slightly with, let's say, 5.0 cm or 5.1, but you need this value, then you will start using the packers, like the front ones, that will take effect to keep your car higher under braking and to not bottom out. If you can avoid using them, it's better for your car, as you will have a more consistent braking and car feeling, but many cars on Spa or Fuji need to use the front packers, otherwise you will be in the ground and you will lose too much lap time. Packers are making the car safer, and that's what you need to know about them. Rear ride height will change massively between cars, and I believe that we are using quite low values since the version 1.2 compared to what we were using 6 months ago, where sometimes we could end up on 8.0 or 9.0 rear ride height. Back then, let's say we were using 7.0 centimeters on the BMW to get a lot of rotation in Monza, but now a safer value 6.8 or 6.5 could be really better for the car to make it more stable, and also to have the normal amount of rotation you should need and enough height to avoid bumps. Compared to version 1.1, I would say that the ride height on the rears barely changed, so you should try to get your old value, try 1 or 2 centimeters more or less, and try to redefine what's a tiny bit better for your car now. Incredibly higher values that make your car completely too high over the ground is really bad, because it creates slides and it will be terrible for survival and for tire management. For the rear packers, they are helping a lot on traction, especially when you put back throttle on some cars like the Corvette or the Mustang, and it's also really good to avoid bottoming, especially in Spa Sector 1. The range that I would recommend to try is from 1.0 cm to 2.5 cm. The other advice I would recommend is that you get telemetry as soon as possible, get something like Motec or plugins to collect your telemetry, so this way you can directly see your car's position with the ground, so take your time to do it, as it really helps out to understand the cars. Speaking of telemetry, we're back to the damper page that I showed you guys last time on the previous guide from May, and things are still quite up to date in terms of logic. On screen you have a reminder of what every slow and fast setting will do to your car. Today I'm just going to do a reminder of what is happening on these graphs. To find the best value, it is mandatory to do at least 5 to 10 lap stints in race condition, if not a full race stint, as you want to get an overall view of what happens to the car and not only a corner by corner approach. Let's get into it. First of all, to have a great car driving wise, you need to have the best possible shape on these curves, which look like this. These curves means the car handles perfectly over any type of bumps or inconsistent surfaces of the track, but that's also helping out on effects like transfer of masses during braking. There are no clear recommended values for front bumps and rebound percentages, but you will generally see people targeting between 12 to 16% on fronts and 14 to 18% on rears, as it is a quite reliable car and better feeling under braking. Even if I just told you what numbers you could aim at, it's not the priority, as on tracks like Qatar you will also be too low, and in tracks like Sebring you will have too high values because there are too many bumps. If you are able to focus on having the perfect graph, it's already doing the job for your car, and you don't always need to aim at precise percentages to maximize your car's potential. I know this was probably the most complex part of the setup and it's not the easiest one to understand, but I hope this will help out to make it more simple. Last page of our guide, we will speak about front toe and rear toe, front roll bar and rear roll bar, and finally the wings. Front toe main effect is to make your car more or less aggressive on initial turn-in. A negative value will decrease turn-in while a positive one will do the opposite. Generally most of the cars run 0 degrees or -1 or -2 clicks into the negative values to keep a stable front end. Rear toe is similar, except that if you use a positive value, it will bring stability and the negative will bring turn-in. It's quite common to see people running 1 to 3 clicks of rear toe as it gives really good stability, but pay attention as it increases tire wear and tire temps. If you run an aggressive car, you can keep 0 degrees on the rear and it should be fine. I don't recommend going into the negative values as the car would be too unstable and really difficult to drive. For the roll bars, more front gives better traction and high speed cornering, while low front gives you better low speed cornering and oversteer. Rear roll bars gives more traction when you lower them, but if you increase them it will get you better mid-corner rotation. Front engine cars and understeer cars will run low front values and high rear to make the car turn, while rear engine cars that are quite oversteery will use a stiffer front roll bar and a softer rear roll bar to keep traction in any type of corners. When version 1.0 came out, people were using super high values of roll bars, like to the point it was even like max. I don't recommend it anymore as now it's quite easy to warm up tires, and also high roll bars are giving way more tire wear than lower roll bars over a race stint. You could probably run aggressive values in qualifying, but the gain is not that important. If you need to run high roll bars, it will be mainly on tracks like Qatar or Silverstone because of the amount of high speed corners. Last subject is the rear wing. Less gives you more top speed but makes the car unstable, while more gives you more stability, more traction and more cornering speed in exchange of less top speed. Since version 1.0, high rear wing values are really strong, especially in qualifying conditions. I made another table that gives you an idea of which wing level you should have per track. With version 1.2, lower wings are slightly stronger because we have way more grip and it works quite well in race condition, but it's really difficult to make a perfect setup around it, so sometimes the car will still run high wings because you need as much consistency and pace as possible in all conditions. This is the end of our guide. I hope it will answer most of the questions I was asked. Don't hesitate to support the channel by subscribing or by following me on Twitch, where I'm almost at 1k follower now. All the best for 2026 and may it be a year full of sim racing for everyone.